Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar, namaskar.
Good evening, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Welcome, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, thank you. Really nice to meet you people again.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's our privilege.
Sir, just 2-3 minutes more, sir.
Okay. I'm here, just call me.
Okay, okay, sir.
सर मैं हूँ निष्ठा। हाँ मैं ये बोल रही सर, ठीक है बाद में बात करते हैं आपसे। Baba sir, shall we start or are we waiting for some other people?
I'm just asking, sir.
Hanji? Baba sir?
Nisa ma'am, you can start now.
Okay. Good afternoon all. Honorable Vice Chancellor sir, DIA sir, deans, professors, colleagues and students, on behalf of the CUPV fraternity and the Department of South and Central Asian Studies, School of International Studies, today I feel honored and privileged to introduce Professor Sanjay Kumar Jha from Central University of Gujarat. We have a tradition that before we start any function or an event, we mark our respect to the university. May I request the esteemed audience to kindly stand up for the university anthem.
विश्वविद्यालय संस्कृतियों का मिलन बिंदु विज्ञान दृष्टि धारण करके विद्यार्थी फुलवारी से नए देश का आंगन सारा ज्ञान विज्ञान का मधुर संगम जीवन मूल्यों का सहारा ये नवाचार का मार्ग बढ़ाता देश विदेश की समझ बढ़ाता भावी पीढ़ी का निर्माता विश्व बंधुत्व का भाव सिखाता तेरी शान रहे तेरा मान रहे पंजाब केंद्रीय विश्वविद्यालय पंजाब केंद्रीय विश्वविद्यालय
Professor Jha is currently the Dean, School of National Security Studies and Professor at the Center for Security Studies. He joined Central University of Gujarat in 2012 and has served as a chairperson, Center for Security Studies, Dean, School of International Studies. He has also held the post of Dean of Student Welfare, Registrar and Provost. Professor Jha has more than 20 years of experience as researcher, analyst, teacher, research supervisor, project director, and administrator at research institutes such as IDSA, Institute for Conflict Management, and has been an officer on special duty for the Government of India. Professor Jha has successfully supervised 5 PhDs and more than 10 MPhils. Currently, he is guiding 8 PhDs and 2 MPhils and 1 postdoctoral research candidate at Central University of Gujarat. With regard to his academic and research interest, I would like to share with my esteemed audience that he has numerous publications, books, and as well as books chapters on national and internal security, terrorism, insurgency, and border management. His forthcoming book is on maritime security, which is going to be published anytime from now from the Pentagon Press. Today, Professor Jha is going to speak and discuss on the problem of Islamic terrorism emanating from Pakistan as well as Afghanistan and how this has destabilized the security architecture of South Asia. Today's theme is relevant in the context of the evolving geopolitics of South Asia, which is sharply characterized by the joint threat of China and Pakistan, the dual standards of good and bad terrorism, especially in the contemporary era of information and hybrid warfare, popularly called as the 4th and the 5th generation warfare. Also, overlapping security, economic, and other exchanges makes the security architecture of South Asia a complex one. Competition and cooperation thus coexist. Pakistan, as we all know, has been an active threat for not only India, but also for its other neighboring countries, such as Afghanistan and Iran. The tendency on the part of Pakistan to play a victim card while simultaneously sponsoring terrorism makes the country, as well as the region, lucrative for various geopolitical contestations. Although a byproduct of this policy is that today South Asia has been increasingly being recognized as a nuclear flashpoint. Further, we have Afghanistan, also called as a graveyard of empires, as it serves as an important gateway to both South and Central Asia. The final details of Pakistan's destabilizing role in Afghanistan through its terror networks such as the Haqqani and its well-established connections with the IS is already well known to the scholars of international relations, political science, as well as South Asian studies. Professor Jha would be enlightening us more on this issue of terrorism. I now request my HOD and Dean, Dr. Baba Singh, to formally welcome Professor Jha.
Thank you very much, ma'am. So, Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Raghavendra Prasad Tiwari ji, distinguished speaker Professor Sanjay Kumar Yah ji, faculty, members of the department, dear students and research scholars of the department. Sabhi ko namaskar and good afternoon to one and all. The Department of South and Central Asian has been feeling privileged and honored to organize the expert lecture by Professor Sanjay Kumar Jha on the topic of South Asian security scenario. On this grand occasion, on behalf of Central University of Punjab and faculty members of the Department of South and Central Asian Studies, indeed, it is honor and privilege to extend a very warm welcome to one and all on this academic event. First of all, I would like to extend a very hearty welcome to Honorable Vice Chancellor Raghavendra Prasad Tiwari ji. At the moment, he is not with us because busy with meeting somewhere. So, sir has kindly accepted not only our invitation, rather motivated and inspired to organize this wonderful event. Very warm welcome to sir. So, department is very happy to have Professor Sanjay Kumar Yaji on with us. The simple and important reason to be happy is that ultimately the true academician like him, who is the originator and evaluator of certain ideas in the department like your Center for Security Studies and ours Department of Political Science in the School of International Studies. Second reason to be happy is that you have been associated with our department as a member of Board of Studies. Our department has been enriching by your wide experience and inputs from time to time in terms of department curriculum, search areas, etc., etc. So giving your consent for invited lecture despite a very busy schedule and your benign presence is indeed great pleasure and honor of the department. Very warm welcome to you, sir. At the last, I would like to extend very warm welcome to the department faculty members, dear students, research scholars, and who are connected with us at the moment. So now I would request to Professor Sanjay Jha to deliver his lecture. Sanjay Jha, please.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. And let me take this opportunity first to thank Central University of Punjab, Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, and your Department of South and Central Asian Studies for inviting me to share some of my views, my thought on a very important issue, security issues in South Asia with a focus on terrorism. I have a presentation which I would like to share with you. I hope it is visible. Is it visible?
Yes, sir, it is.
And you can hear me. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Topic given to me for today's interaction is security issues in South Asia, terrorism. Both security issues and South Asia and terrorism. Why I have linked the two? Because terrorism remains one of the most serious challenges that countries in South Asia they face today. If you examine any document available on terrorism by international research institutes or utterances by governments, you will find that the South Asian countries, they have been facing the scourge of terrorism for long. Afghanistan, Pakistan, they are widely recognized as epicenter of global terrorism since 9/11 and even before that. Uh, India has been facing terrorism in various forms in multiple dimensions right since its independence in 1947, and other countries of South Asia like Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives, all of them are facing this problem in various forms, various dimensions. So it would be worth examining some of the underlying factors, both structural, both global, and many issues relating to internal organizations of various states in South Asia. This is roughly the map of South Asia. Maldives is missing down here. You have Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. South Asia as a region, that concept itself is now being debated. What countries should be part of South Asia and whether it would be proper to treat it as one security unit. It is 8 countries in the region. South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation started in 1985 with 7 countries. Afghanistan was added in 2007. Apart from these 8 countries, you have China and Myanmar closely associated with this region due to geographical proximity. And any security architecture for this region or any issue relating to security uh, will not be complete without a reference to China and Myanmar, because both these countries, they impinge heavily on security issues in South Asia. This region covers 11.7% of Asian continent and 3.5% of world surface. But with population about 1.8 billion, it constitutes 39.4% of Asia's population, about 1/4 of world's population, making it the most populous and most densely populated region in the world. Why this point is important? Because in terms of population, in terms of its geographical spread, and in terms of issues and diversity that you witness in this region is important. And in recent years, in 21st centuries, this region has been in the news for 2 broad reasons. One I would call negative region, and B I will call positive region. On the positive side, this region is seen as a region with prospects for economic growth and economic development. Students of international relations would understand that there is a debate debate among scholars that center of gravity of global affairs is shifting towards Asia. And China and India are 2 major countries in this region with a very, very promising economic growth. China has already registered its presence very effectively at global level in terms of its economic capabilities, and India is also being seen as a country with the largest democracy, country with huge market, and country with potential to contribute immensely in many global affairs. Negative side, if I talk about of this region is marked by multiple layers of conflicts. Some of them are colonial in nature, we owe it to colonial period, and currently also this region is seen as epicenter of global terrorism, particularly Afghanistan, Pakistan area, and the groups operating in these countries, they have extensive operational linkages with groups operating in other parts of the country, and most of these groups, they subscribe to uh, extremist interpretation of Islam, and they are widely called as Islamist extremist groups. And ISIS is one of them. One of the fastest growing region in the world, according to World Bank data, growth set to step up to 7% and then 7.1%. This figure uh, gives you picture of pre-corona period. During corona period, the figures may vary a little bit and the rate of growth may not be the same, but the prospects for growth remains very, very promising. Country-wise projected growth: Afghanistan 3%, Bangladesh 7.3%, Bhutan 5.4%, and Maldives 5.7%, and other countries also you have this growth. But at the same time, due to its huge population base and due to many internal contradictions within states, this region remains one of the poorer region compared to other regional groupings like European Union or even ASEAN and other groups. Though India is rising as an important power, states in region play much a smaller role in global affairs than its counterparts such as Europe. I'm not including China in this. I'm talking about those 8 countries where the role that these countries should be playing at international level, the role is not that significant at present, though India has shown certain promising trends and there is wider recognition by major powers that India is in a position to play a major role in many areas, including affairs in Afghanistan, including containing China's growth in Indian Ocean region, including role of India possibly as security provider and balancer in Indo-Pacific region. That role is being viewed by India, but depends how India is able to balance its traditional strategic autonomy with imperatives of aligning with Americans or other powerful countries like Japan, Australia in this region against China. So that dilemma is there with Indian policymakers, whether to what extent it should go ahead with other countries, particularly United States, against China, or should we handle differences with China bilaterally? Flex relations.
I think there are some network issues at his end. We'll be waiting for sir. We will not be disconnecting and we'll be waiting for sir.
Yes, now audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, okay. I will present my slide again.
Yeah.
Now is it okay? Yes. Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible.
And the slide
Yes,
is
sir.
also.
We can see the slides. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So apart from interstate relationship and security issues associated with that, we need to include various non-traditional security issues and human security issues if you want to study security issues. I will give you one example in this regard. The cross-border movement of people. It could be seen as a security threat to a state because of many factors. At the same time, it could be argued that such migrations or such cross-border movement of people illegal within the parameter of how states have been organized, how borders have been demarcated. It's at the same time an economic issue and humanitarian issue also. So there are multiple dimensions. This region is also marked with armed conflicts, terrorism, border dispute, interstate hostilities, including nuclear rivalry between India and Pakistan. Each and every country, you will find some kind of internal armed conflicts going on. Even Bhutan is not an exception because of certain ethnic issues there, though Bhutan is not witnessing full-blown insurgency, etc. But there certain issues are there. Bangladesh, you have very real threat of extremist Islamist mobilization and activities of certain groups. Then you have Nepal. Nepal is still trying to uh, organize its structures around new constitution after a deal with Maoists. Then you have Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is also in a process of again rebuilding that nation after this very, very bloody war because of activities of LTTE. Certainly, it falls under the category of subconventional war, and the Sri Lanka is still trying to recover from that through nation building process. And nuclear rivalry between India and Pakistan, that is well known a fact. Security as an ambiguous concept, therefore, I have already argued that security in this region cannot be simply understood or reduced to a very, very straight-jacketed understanding of security. You have multiple issues, and this out of those issues, terrorism remains one of the key characteristics. In this region, you have various manifestations of terrorism. The most important manifestation of terrorism in this region is proxy war as an extension of a state policy. We have seen both in the case of Pakistan and Afghanistan, the terrorist groups are being used and were used in the past as a strategic asset for a state to further its own agenda. And there are 2-3 reasons for that. First reason being that after 1971 war, gradual realization in Pakistan was that it would be very difficult to score a decisive military victory against India on the issue of Kashmir. Therefore, they had to devise a strategy wherein, without a formal fight between two countries, how to put across its viewpoint or pursue its interest of weakening India or snatching Jammu and Kashmir from India. So that cycle began in 80s. And another factor that gave a fillip to this idea was Soviet invasion in Afghanistan in 79, and there was a great power rivalry in Afghanistan, wherein the United States also pitched in, and both United States and Pakistan together, they created a system of training people on religious lines and using those people against Soviet Union. So thus you had origin of what we generally know as Taliban, Mujahideen during that period. And over a period of time, that culture, that culture has become so embedded in Pakistani state structure that Pakistan started using it for both for their strategic ambitions and as a leverage against the United States, because geopolitical location of Pakistan is such that United States thinks that without involvement of Pakistan, it would be very difficult for United States to reach any meaningful agreement with Taliban in Afghanistan. So Pakistan remains very, very, very central to US strategy in Afghanistan. Then you had consequent transformation of nature of insurgency and terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir also. In Jammu and Kashmir, if you go by history of Jammu and Kashmir, you will find that we can identify at least three different phases of insurgency or violent movement that is being organized by Pakistan largely to a great extent, though there are certain internal factors also. First phase was where you had organizations like JKLF fighting for independent Kashmir. Their understanding of Kashmir was different from what jihadis today understand as Kashmir. Their understanding of Kashmir was based on Kashmiriyat, it was based on cultural history of Kashmir. Of course, religion played an important role, but that vision of Kashmir had place for other communities also. Gradually, that JKLF group, that they lost favor of Pakistani state because their agenda was independent Kashmir. Then they started propping up groups like Hizbul Mujahideen in Jammu and Kashmir, and Hizbul Mujahideen had two distinct features. One, again, it was an extension of Pakistan's deep state. A second, its agenda was to ensure merger of Jammu and Kashmir with Pakistan, and basically on religious line. So then you had a distinct phase of insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir with a stated religious objective. And then third stage with global Islamist terrorist network spreading to different parts of the world. Global jihadi network is being facilitated by Al-Qaeda with sanctuary in Afghanistan. You find emergence of groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaise Muhammad in JNK. They had very, very deep linkage, not only with the state, Pakistani state, but similar ideological brethren who were trying to fight for so-called persecution against Muslims in different part of the world, and they were arguing for jihad, global jihad, and India was somehow became a very, very distinct theater also. So today's insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir, if you find that, it's a religious mobilization and impact of jihadi brand of terrorism. So that is one prominent understanding of terrorism. Terrorism also in this region is linked to organized criminal gangs, organized crime, because terrorist organizations, they need money, they need organizational structure, they need resources, they need to invest their resources, whatever they were collecting, and then you had a very elaborate network of stakeholders which help terrorist organizations to sustain. You have terror finance network, you have network for procurement of arms, you have network for investment of resources, what terrorist organizations they collect. Then another angle to this terrorism in this area is that it is also seen as deep social political grievances, seen as expression of people against repressive structures, social and political grievances. If you study insurgencies in the Northeast, if you study Balochistan movement in Balochistan, if you study LTT in Jammu and in Sri Lanka, you will find that the deep social and political issues were behind that. And how this happened? Because all these countries, they had your colonial history, many of them, and in the process of nation building after they got independence, they became um, sovereign states. Then you had this process of nation building, and you had this process of bringing different groups together, giving them share in political decision making, etc., etc. So in Kashmir, in Sri Lanka, or for example in India's northeast or Naxalite movement, they are also being interpreted in terms of manifestation of social and political grievances. Then you have just war against repressive state. This is the principal narrative of Maoist movement. And in Nepal suffered very badly due to this Maoist insurgencies, and somehow the Maoists were able to exercise such influence in that country that major political parties they were forced to take note of it, and they entered an agreement with Maoists in Nepal, and Maoists are now part of state structure. They had a prime minister also. Again, their party is part of coalition also, who is governing that. So just war against repressive state, that is also. Many insurgencies in the Northeast are on this issue that the Indian state is repressive, we are not represented there, India is not addressing our issues properly. If you go to Naxal narratives, they will say the same thing, that there is the long standing the grievances, tribal issues, land relation, exploitation, all these things are used to justify Maoist movement in India. That state is doing that, and because a state is doing that, it is just to protest a state, just to resist that, and in that process, even if groups are taking up arms, groups are using violence, then it says that it is repressive. So all these parameters are there, all these frameworks are there to understand, but 9/11 changed many of these narratives. And one of the major narratives after 9/11 was that violence as a tool to achieve political objective is not acceptable, irrespective of legitimacy of grievances. The argument here is that violence as a tool to achieve political objective may be justified against repressive colonial rulers, because students of security studies would know that the term insurgency at some point in history was also associated with some positive connotation, because it gave legitimacy to fight of indigenous people against a of external oppressive state. And most of the insurgencies, you would know that they were against colonial masters, or they were against rulers who were ruling those countries. So be it British rule in India, be it French in Malaya, and then British UK, Malaya French in Algeria, and later on the experience of United States in Vietnam. Then you have insurgencies in the Iraq. Uh, all these things were seen as legitimate violence. Even PLA's violence against Israeli occupation was given legitimacy, that it's violent. But after 9/11, it says the violence is not acceptable. Another reason why violence is not acceptable, irrespective of legitimacy of grievances, is that you are in a democratic system. And in any democratic system, democracy has wherewithal, democracy has mechanism to resolve differences through peacefulness by through available institutions. So in a country like India, if you have violence grievances, then there are channels, legal channels, there are political channels through which you can articulate your grievances, you can put pressure on government, you can participate in elections, you can win elections, and you can resolve those issues. So that is one parameter that is applicable to democratic countries, because any democratic countries, particularly countries like India, with immense diversity in terms of region, religion, economic status, level of development, you will find immense diversity. And in these immense diversities, they give rise to social tension also. So it is quite natural in a multi-party democracy with such diversity, where peoples will have grievances, people will have problems. People may not be very happy with political leadership. People may not be very happy with the way the government or the state is approaching issue of development, issue of land relation, etc., etc. But do we endorse violence to achieve those objectives? So here the interpretation is not about legitimacy of grievances, and this model is applicable to both Islamist terrorism and insurgencies like Maoists, because both these movements, they use certain social discontent, certain policies of government as discriminatory against fellow against a person of certain religion or against certain social group. So that debate has to be seen in the context of attempts by a democratic state to address those issues. So major narrative of ISIS is that it is incumbent on Muslim to fight an unjust international order because Muslims are being persecuted in many countries by Western countries or by Christianity or by other religions. There, they articulate interests of Muslims as one interest globally against who had to fight against different ideology, different worldview, different vision, and their objective is to pursue that. So violence as a tool is justified citing some social political causes and structural issues within a society. The second assumption when you study terrorism, etc., is a manifestation of violence is triggered by multiple complex factors. So even if there is a violent issue, there is a genuine problem. Jammu and Kashmir, for example, there may be genuine political grievances. There may be the case that the political leadership, they have not handled this properly. There may be case that there were corruption. There may be the case that elections were rigged. But do we endorse violence to resolve those things? And that is the central question. Here you have two distinct parameters. One is grievances and another is violence. Normally students or researchers, they fall prey to this very seductive idea of using cause to explain violence. The causality relationship between issue and violence is easily established by inferences. Empirically, it is very, very difficult to do that. As a researcher, I can tell you that manifestation of violence cannot be explained merely by an existence of an issue. You need something else. You need an organization. You need support of a state. You need resources. You need networks to do that. So any study on terrorism in this region has to be viewed not only with the help of many underlying causal manifestations, but also in the light of geopolitics, in the light of organizational dynamics, in the light of networks of stakeholders that is there. So it becomes more and more complex. Jammu and Kashmir, for example, again, I'm taking Jammu and Kashmir because it has manifestations of many things that we have discussed and we are going to discuss here. So geopolitics is important. The proxy war approach of Pakistan is important, and the global jihadi narrative, how they are being pushed and they are being accepted by a section of population, that is also important. In Kashmir, one of the narratives is that we are fighting for a religious order, jihad, what they call it jihad. They call it jihad. And the argument is that we have defeated one superpower in Afghanistan, Soviet invasion in 80s. We are on the verge of defeating another superpower, United States in Afghanistan. They cite US deal with Taliban, wherein US virtually recognized Taliban as a legitimate player in a state of affairs in Afghanistan. Otherwise, if you examine the deal between the United States and Taliban, you will find that on many occasions the consent of a state was not there. Even a state did not participate in many of the meetings, and it fell upon a state to implement those, as Afghanistan state. So that is, you have to understand all this. Terrorism can also be understood as a method which is ideologically neutral. This is a method which can be used by any group, left wing, right wing, religious, and this. So terrorism is a method used by a state as in proxy war, can be used by groups adhering to extreme left ideology like Maoists, can be used by extreme right ideology, like jihadi. So this framework is important to understand. Then you have South Asia conflict map. This entire region, you find different kinds of conflict in South Asia. South Asia, fatality, major incident, country-wise incident. I will skip those things. The broad trends in South Asia, in the context of that conceptual understanding of terrorism, and in the face of that geopolitics of this region, certain broad trends with regard to terrorism in South Asia can be drawn. First is, it remains among most violent regions globally. If you read any document on global terrorism index or global terrorism report, any database, you will find that the countries in South Asia are among the worst affected states: Pakistan, Afghanistan, and even India there. Because if you, apart from Pakistan, Afghanistan region, the areas afflicted by terrorism, serious level of terrorism, is Iraq, Syria. Both in Iraq and Syria, the ISIS menace has been cornered to great extent in terms of their territorial ambitions. Then you have African countries, Nigeria, etc., where you have Boko Haram and different groups. So this region is, first thing, is among most violent regions globally in terms of terrorist violence. The second is Afghanistan, highest number of deaths terrorism, followed by Iraq, Syria, and Nigeria. Bhutan perhaps is the only country in last few years we have not recorded death from terrorism. I'm talking about data which 2 years back data, but currently also Bhutan, you have certain intra-group tensions, but terrorism and insurgency you will not find against Bhutan's government. We had in the past certain examples of Indian terrorist groups or Indian insurgent groups like Ulfa or Kamtapur Liberation Organization. They're taking shelter in Bhutan, but Bhutan government was cooperating with India, and India, along with government of Bhutan, was able to contain that challenge in this. Fatalities, this Sri Lanka, this is now peaceful, but Sri Lanka before LTT was wiped out, was very, very seriously affected by terrorism. Proxy war and cross-border terrorism from Pakistan, situation in Afghanistan, and rise of ISIS. So even within the framework of terrorism, if we have to identify 2-3 broad parameters to understand terrorism in South Asia, these are proxy wars. It's a strategy of Pakistan against India. And I need not go into detail. It's a lot of literature. It is not simply that India is saying that Pakistan is using terrorist groups against India. It is not the Indian government's utterances alone. It is well documented by researchers across the globe. It is well documented by even the testimonies of Pakistan's rulers. If you go by Musharraf's statement, go by government documents, it's a well-known fact. Even United States and other countries also in the world, they know it and they keep nudging Pakistan. But due to geopolitical location of Pakistan, you cannot nudge Pakistan, push Pakistan beyond a point, because Pakistan is required by United States for any lasting, meaningful solution in Afghanistan. Then situation in Afghanistan. Situation in Afghanistan is evolving. Now the deal between Afghanistan Taliban and United States reached during Trump period. Several doubts were cast about the implementability of that group. Several doubts were cast about the representation of various groups within Afghanistan in the peace process, the role of a state there, and there were debates about how you can trust Taliban. Can Taliban be trusted? Is there any distinction between good Taliban and bad Taliban, or extremist Taliban or moderate Taliban? All these distinctions were coined during the long drawn process of negotiation, that yes, within Taliban you have liberal element within Taliban, but all these things have been challenged. Afghanistan's situation remains fluid. It depends how Joe Biden's administration in the United States, they approach the problem of Afghanistan. Do they continue with the understanding that Trump administration had about Afghanistan and about the exit of United States, or the present regime will not go very fast on that agreement, and it will take time, it will assess situation, and it will ensure that Afghanistan doesn't again slip into anarchy, doesn't again slip into a place that becomes hotbed of terrorism and starts posing threat to international security. And of late, ISIS is major threat in that region. ISIS activities has been noticed for some time in Afghanistan and Pakistan, though in India, the activities of ISIS or Daesh, I call it, is not that widespread. And Muslims from India, the percentage of Muslims joining in India is very, very minuscule compared to even percentage of Muslims joining ISIS from Maldives. Maldives, you will be surprised to know that a good number of people from Maldives, they were joining ISIS. Then ISIS is there. But radicalization of late, the government of India has also recognized that radicalization is a serious problem, and around 75 to 100 persons in India, they have been reported to be part of ISIS. Many of them, they even uh, went to Syria and Iraq to fight for a religious cause, to fight for jihad. And the Indian government is very, very serious about this radicalization, even though it has not assumed the kind of proportion that extremist groups they were expecting from India. Extremist Islamist terrorism is the most serious threats. Other threats are also there, but across South Asia, this is the most serious threat. And you have since 2005 more than 71,400. The figure is higher. And Afghanistan and Pakistan, they are the main. Sri Lanka, then Sri Lanka, you have mostly Sri Lanka and Nepal, you have been able to address this problem. In Nepal, through negotiation, through co-opting Maoists into a state structure, the Maoists joined this mainstream politics, they fought elections, they came in power also, became prime minister also, Maoist leaders. In Sri Lanka, on the other hand, LTT was simply wiped off. The military strategy was used against LTT, and militarily LTT was defeated. So LTT as an organization, it was eliminated, and we have not seen a very, very serious prospect for a revival of LTT in Sri Lanka. So Afghanistan, Nepal and Sri Lanka, you had this regimes in Bangladesh, Bhutan, they are cooperating with India. In Bangladesh also, the attitude towards Islamist terrorists, Islamist mobilization, again depends on who comes to power. So Awami League government, current government, it is friendly with India, and as a result, among other factors, you have seen significant improvement in security situation in India's northeast. Earlier, when BNP was in power, you had this different attitude towards groups that were active in India, and many groups operating in the northeast, they were doing this taking shelter in Bangladesh, and they had linkage with state apparatus in Bangladesh. Then Pakistan, major trend, Pakistan's 2-3 factors I can count. That Pakistan, you had basically 3 kinds of terrorism. One kind of terrorism is that is being used against India. So Pakistan, in Pakistani establishment or Pakistani society, you feel that this group gets legitimacy in Pakistan. This group enjoys patronage by state, and this group, Hafiz Said, for example, or Maulana Masood Mazhar, or Hezbollah Mujahideen leader Salahuddin, etc. they have very good support base in Pakistan. Then you had second layer of terrorism in Pakistan is the terror groups who are operating against Pakistani state, and the Tehreek-e-Taliban, that Pakistani version of Taliban, you have said. And then Pakistan using terrorists as a strategic asset in Afghanistan also. So you had Pakistani linkage with Taliban, who was fighting United States, Pakistani linkage with Haqqani network there. So all, and then you had intra uh, group fighting and terrorism in Pakistan, where you had Shia Sunni divide or sectarian violence in there. So you had different type of them. Then situation in Balochistan. Balochistan insurgency is different. It's a plank. It's on the plank of identity of Baloch people. It is based on their exploitation of their resources, based on lack of proper representation in Pakistani army and Pakistani state apparatus. All these factors are there. So Pakistan, you had this, and the factor that is sustaining this kind of terrorism in Pakistan, you can find that in the way the state is organized, the way the military is a prominent player in Pakistan, the way the military's understanding of security and military's understanding of the role of these groups in Pakistan. Then you have Nepal, three issues, security issues. That one is geopolitics. Now, this geopolitics is making Nepal a buffer state between India and China. And successive Nepalese regime, they have understood their geopolitical importance, and they successfully leveraged their relationship with one another. So India and China both enjoy good relationship with Nepal, but there is certain amount of geopolitical rivalry also. And certain Nepali, for example, the Oli government, which was there till recently, and Oli government had pro-China over just the communist groups. Then you have certain political parties where you find India more comfortable dealing with them, and certain groups, China is more comfortable. So geopolitical, second, open border with India. India-Nepal border is open border. Anybody can cross, and in the past this border has been used by extremist groups, by terrorist groups, for smuggling fake currency notes, for movement of terrorists, etc., etc. IC 814 99, everybody remembers that the Nepal was used, and it was widely reported at that time that the Pakistani embassy in Nepal, they are in fact they are harboring terrorist groups and using Nepal border to infiltrate terrorism in India. Maoist Front Comprehensive Peace Agreement is there, but Nepal's relationship with India and China and the open border, these are two issues that have huge security implication for India also. Then Maldives is a strategic location. Then you have growing Chinese influence in that area for some time, and growing radicalization. Two issues if I have to choose, that China is using Maldives for this strategic objective. In fact, China's entire Belt and Road Initiative, or entire initiative for infrastructure development in various countries, it has a strong strategic element. It has a strong elements of Chinese vision of world, and the role China wants to play at international level. And there, one of the roles that China is invested that if you go through the Chinese military doctrine, that China views India as regional hegemon, and India is trying to become hegemon, and it would be imperative that India remains confined to South Asia, and India is not looking at this its role beyond this region. So India and China geopolitical competition, you can see entire South Asian region, not only in Maldives, in Sri Lanka also, you have see economic being taken as a main driver of Chinese presence in Nepal. You can see the growing Chinese influence in Bangladesh, Myanmar, though it's not formally part of that region. All these Chinese geopolitics is there. So Maldives also you can understand, and then growing radicalization is one area where Maldives has faced. Sri Lanka, terrorism was wiped out, but in 2019, that the terror attack in Sri Lanka, it once again became a very important event because it signaled the arrival of that extremist Islamist mobilization in Sri Lanka also. And this uh, National Tawheed Jamaat or Jamaatul Millatu Ibrahim, all these local groups widely associated with IS, Daesh, they carried out attacks, and this once again brought the issue of process of reconciliation, process of integration of Muslim community into mainstream of Sri Lanka, and all related issues relating to this radicalization, etc., etc. That, and this ISIS threat that in Sri Lanka became certainly very alarming for Indian establishment also, because some of the groups that I mentioned had linkage in India, and given the security scenario in India, given the nature of, it was thought that this group and this kind of affiliation or networks would have very serious consequences for India also, because in India, in Kerala, we have example of many youth, they are getting lured by this extremist ideology. They are going to Syria and Afghanistan, Iraq to fight for jihad. And there are reports of that similar radical mobilization being undertaken in other states of South India also. So Sri Lanka's this attraction and this incident of terrorism carried out by ISIS became very important. I'm just touching on issues. Bangladesh Islamist terror group, broad trends. There are 6 proscribed groups in Bangladesh: Harkatul Jihadul Islami, Jamaatul JMJB, JMB, PCPB. But Jamaatul Mujahideen, that is a very prominent group, and it has linked with extremist groups within Bangladesh, extremist political parties, Islamist political parties in Bangladesh, and also has linkage with international terrorist organizations. And Bangladesh also has witnessed a number of attacks, number of terror incidents inspired by ISIS ideology, and at the same time, the attempts to again radicalize people, attempt to spread the radical interpretation of Islam among people. Here, I would like to just recall many things. In Bangladesh, never subscribed to the two-nation theory. Even it became Pakistan, East Pakistan after 1947. Language and nationalism remained major issues, and that was the main issue of contention between East Pakistan and West Pakistan. And creation of Bangladesh in 1971 demonstrated that you cannot only have religion as a very binding force in the state formation. Then Bangladesh, 2 issues, or broadly I will highlight that issue is Bangladesh extremist mobilization in Bangladesh and its impact on India. Given the nature of India-Bangladesh borders, anybody can cross over. It's a very porous border, and this porous nature of border has contributed to a large number of illegal migration, and the question of illegal migration from Bangladesh has assumed certain proportion that it has become a political issue. Last year, if you recall, there were protests. The government attempted to bring NRC or Citizenship Amendment Act, and one of the factors was among these things was how to curb this illegal infiltration from Bangladesh into India's northeast. So the migration from illegal migration from Bangladesh, this angle is also important, apart from other economic factors which force people to migrate, to cross over the border, this religious factor. And this debate again is being triggered off on the issue of Rohingya refugees, whether they should be treated on humanitarian grounds as refugee, or this should be a debt. India, broadly, you have two broad trends in terrorism relating to Islamist mobilization. One is Jammu and Kashmir, the changing nature of Jammu insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir, where religion is the primary driver now. Even groups they operating in Jammu and Kashmir now they openly profess that they are fighting for Islam. They are doing jihad there. And the second is that radicalization in different parts of India, inspired by ISIS ideology. You will find that instances from Kerala, from Maharashtra, from West Bengal, and from different parts of the countries where a number of more than 100 cases of radicalization that they have been reported, and many cases people have come back also, but in many cases people joined these groups abandoning their family. Many of them are well educated, many of them had good job, but still they were radicalized to such an extent that they left their families, the country, and they went to their. So that radicalization, it is debatable, debated among scholars that to what extent India should take that threat seriously. And there is a sense that the potential for such religious mobilization remains very high in India, and India cannot be complacent about that. So in India is primarily one of the recipients of this kind of uh, Islamist terrorism, partly because of its relationship with Pakistan, wherein the situation in Jammu and Kashmir is certainly is giving some ideological and religious justification for violence there. And then attempts by groups using internet, information technology, social media to radicalize a section of youth in India using social and political fault lines. As I pointed out earlier, any democratic setup you will have differences with that. So with this I will stop, and
Thank you very much, sir, for a very comprehensive and in-depth analysis of the problems which pertain to terrorism and South Asia. You had explored the dynamics of terrorism with the context of multiple layers of conflict, and how terrorism actually manifests itself through proxy wars and agendas, etc. You had also brought to the surface the concept of just war against repressive states, the broad trends and that have been underlying, and in special you had given a special focus to Pakistan as well as to Afghanistan. How Pakistan has portrayed itself as a victim, although to a larger extent it has been advocating the policy of it has been spreading terrorism and advocating hatred towards various neighbors, and especially in the context of Shia Muslims and the religious minorities in Pakistan. And with regard to Nepal, you had thrown light on the like how it is sandwiched between India and China, and there are long historical and cultural context to which its strategic behavior is how its strategic behavior is shaped. And with relation to Maldives and Sri Lanka, you had spoken about the Islamic radicalization and how IS has penetrated the, the grievances, like how IS has penetrated the society as such, like, having an establishing and deepening its ties with the local Muslims, and how their grievances are as such exploited by the people. And I would also like to ask the students whether they have doubts and some questions, and the house is now open for discussion.
If
Hello.
any,
Yes,
yes, yes.
Yogesh.
Good afternoon, sir.
Please raise your hands. Raise your hands who have doubts and some discussions. Yes, Yogesh. Yes.
Sir, I would like to ask a question that whether we are failing academically in countering the terrorism in ideologically, because we are not doing open research in all things in order to provide counter ideologically to the terrorism.
Uh, Academic institutions, they are very slow to respond to this security scenario, because the academic culture that we have in university, we are comfortable with looking at conflict from a distance. The current conflicts, we are not. Second, this ideological narrative. Academic institutions should work, and but there are methodological challenges. We at our university, we are also facing. Suppose somebody wants to work on radicalization, the first hurdle that the student faces is access to data, access to authentic data. People are not willing to, government is very reluctant to share real-time data. Historical data, yes, there are methodological challenges. It is very difficult to visit the field. It is very difficult to collect material, authentic material, verifiable material through field survey also, because the conflict theaters access is very restricted. So students or academics, they prefer to choose a topic wherein they have material and they can do that. So Indian university system, you will not find very impressive body of work on terrorism and terror networks. Most of the work on terrorism are basically cause-driven exercises, where you identify causes for that, the dynamics of terrorism. Yes, so to that extent, I will agree with you.
Okay. Yes. Any other question and doubt, or any other point that wish to be conveyed?
You
Any
can
other
also
point?
send me mail on mail if you have any question and doubt. So my mail is there. You can interact with me. Your students can interact with me in future also with any doubt, and I will be happy to respond to their queries. Okay.
Yes, so we have told them that, and in fact, I think you have met the senior batch also who are currently in the fourth semester. Your visit was there to the university when the current fourth semester students were there. Yes, the first semester and the PhD scholars. Do you have any point to make, any discussion or anything else? Okay, now I invite Dr. Meher to please give a vote of thanks, and after that we'll be winding up. Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of South and Central Asian Studies Central University of Punjab, I take this opportunity to propose the vote of thanks to this special lecture on South Asian security, special reference to the terrorism. At the outset, I thank Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor R.P. Tiwari sir for his guidance to us in our activity and his support. Further, let me thank our resources person, Professor S.K. Jha. We are really enlightened with your knowledge and presence. A special thank to the organizing committee, teaching and non-teaching staff for their support and coordination. Thanks to our student and the scholar for their active participation. with these warm words and kind message, we move to the end of this lecture. Before closing the session, may I request everyone to stand for 2 minutes for our national anthem.
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उत्कल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Finally, thank you so much, sir, for giving your precious time and enlightening us with your academic knowledge on terrorism. And I would also like to thank the non-teaching staff, Mr. Mandeep Singh, and the Computer Science Department for giving the live telecast of this lecture on YouTube. And thank you so much. Without the non-teaching staff, this wouldn't have been possible. Over to you, Dr. Baba Singh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It's so.